The cafe was one of the busiest spots in the city, known for its warm lighting, soft music, and aroma of freshly brewed coffee that could instantly lift anyone's mood. It was a typical busy afternoon, with people chatting quietly over their cups, some working on laptops, and others enjoying a peaceful moment away from the rush of the streets. The staff moved quickly, balancing trays and orders, making sure everyone felt attended to. Among them was a young waitress, calm yet observant, who had been working at this cafe for a couple of years. She had learned to read people quickly, noticing small gestures, expressions, and moods. It was a skill that often helped her handle difficult customers and avoid unnecessary conflicts. The door opened with a soft jingle, and the atmosphere shifted almost immediately. Everyone turned their attention toward a new guest entering the cafe. It was clear from the way he carried himself that he was not an ordinary customer. His presence commanded attention. He was tall, dressed in a finely tailored suit, and his expression was serious, almost intimidating. With him came a small entourage, quietly following his every move. The staff exchanged quick glances, some tensing up in anticipation. The young waitress, however, remained calm, noticing the slight tension in the air. She had seen many types of people in her time at the cafe, but there was something about this man that set him apart. His movements, the way he scanned the room, and the slight furrow of his brow all spoke of someone used to being in control and not accustomed to waiting or being told no. He approached the counter, and the waitress could see the impatience in his eyes. He gave a quick glance at the menu, barely skimming the options, and then ordered a coffee in a precise, specific way. It was not just any coffee. It had to be prepared exactly how he wanted it. He added a request for a traditional dish, something familiar from his homeland. The waitress noticed how his fingers drummed lightly on the counter, a small but clear sign of frustration as the barista moved to take his order. She took a deep breath, preparing herself mentally to handle the situation. She knew from experience that rushing or showing panic would only make him more upset. As the staff began preparing his order, the tycoon's restlessness grew. He glanced at his watch several times, then at the cafe around him, almost as if measuring how quickly things were moving. The chatter of the other customers and the soft background music seemed to irritate him more. The waitress quietly observed his gestures, noting every frown and every subtle sigh. She could tell he was used to a life where everything happened immediately, where waiting was not an option. She reminded herself to stay composed and ready to step in if needed. Her mind started running through possible ways to diffuse the tension without drawing unnecessary attention. Then it happened. The tycoon raised his hand slightly, signaling his intention to leave. The entourage looked nervous, unsure how to respond, while the other customers instinctively leaned back in their seats, sensing the impending drama. The young waitress made a quick decision. She would approach him, but carefully. She did not want to provoke him further, but she also saw an opportunity to calm the situation, perhaps even impress him. She took a few steps toward the counter, keeping her expression polite and friendly. Her heart raced a little, but she reminded herself to stay confident. As she got closer, the tycoon looked up, his eyes meeting hers. There was a sharpness there, a test almost as if he were assessing her immediately. The waitress smiled gently, keeping her posture relaxed and her tone calm. She greeted him politely, asking if she could assist with his order personally. There was a pause. The entire cafe seemed to hold its breath. The tycoon's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment, the waitress worried that she had made a mistake. But she remembered what she had learned over the years. People often respond to genuine effort and calm confidence. Instead of reacting angrily, she continued speaking, carefully choosing her words. She noticed the slight twitch of his lips, almost imperceptible, and interpreted it as a moment of surprise. The tycoon had not expected anyone to approach him in such a composed and confident way, let alone someone willing to ensure his order was exactly to his liking. She suggested a few ways to enhance his coffee experience and explained the dish he had requested with attention to detail, demonstrating knowledge and care. Every word was measured, polite, and respectful. The tycoon paused, clearly processing what was happening. The initial tension in his shoulders softened slightly, though he still maintained an air of authority. The young waitress continued to offer small, thoughtful gestures. A smile, a nod, a willingness to listen and adjust. Slowly, the rigid expression that had dominated his face since he entered the cafe began to relax. The baristas and other staff watched quietly, noticing how the situation, which seemed destined to end with frustration and anger, was beginning to shift. It was in these quiet moments that the waitress realized the power of simple human connection. She did not need to impress with wealth, titles, or status. She simply needed to understand and respond with empathy, patience, and knowledge. Her actions were deliberate but natural, showing attentiveness without overstepping boundaries. The tycoon, for the first time since he had walked in, stopped frowning. He looked at her, a mix of curiosity and respect appearing in his eyes. It was a subtle but significant change, and the waitress knew she had successfully captured his attention. As she finished explaining the dish and adjusting his coffee order according to his preferences, the tycoon's body language changed further. His fingers stopped drumming, his gaze softened, and a faint smile emerged. The cafe, which had been tense with anticipation, felt a wave of relief as the atmosphere shifted from stress to curiosity and admiration. Patrons who had been watching discreetly now exchanged impressed glances. The young waitress, meanwhile, remained composed, careful not to let the slight success affect her demeanor. She simply continued with her work, attentive and professional. In those moments, it became clear to everyone in the cafe that sometimes, understanding a person's needs, responding with genuine care, and remaining calm in the face of tension could change the entire outcome of a situation. The young waitress had not only managed to prevent a scene, but she had also begun to earn the respect of one of the most intimidating figures in the room. And while no one could have predicted what would happen next, it was evident that this encounter was far from ordinary. It was a quiet, human-centric moment of connection that hinted at something remarkable about to unfold. The young waitress returned to her station, her mind still replaying the brief encounter with the tycoon. Something about him had intrigued her, not just his wealth or commanding presence, but the subtle layers beneath his stern exterior. She had seen people like him before, individuals who carried immense power and authority yet hid vulnerabilities behind strict discipline and sharp gazes. She knew that handling someone like him required more than routine service. It required patience, observation, and a touch of understanding that went beyond ordinary interactions. As she polished a set of glasses, she kept glancing toward the counter, curious about the tycoon's next move. He had not left yet, a detail that gave her a quiet sense of relief. She watched as he stood slightly apart from the main crowd, his entourage whispering occasionally, trying to interpret his expressions. She noticed the tension in their shoulders, the way they followed his lead without question. Her eyes lingered on him, noting how his sharp movements softened just a little each time he caught her eye or noticed her attentiveness. Time passed slowly, but the cafe remained a place of quiet tension. Regular customers began to notice the unusual scene as well. Whispers floated through the room about the rich man who had walked in and almost left in anger, only to be met with unexpected calm from the young waitress. It seemed that the power of simple human connection was beginning to take effect. People were intrigued, curious to see what would happen next, though they didn't dare intervene. The waitress took a moment to review what she had done so far. She had approached him politely, offered assistance, and adjusted his order carefully. But she knew that it wasn't enough to just fix the immediate problem. Someone like him might return another day, and the impression she left would matter. She thought about language, tone, and gestures, realizing that communication wasn't just about words. It was about creating comfort and confidence through subtle cues. Her previous experience with different customers had taught her that even the smallest act of attentiveness could leave a lasting impression. As she continued serving other patrons, the tycoon finally approached her side again. This time, his steps were measured, deliberate, and less hurried than before. The young waitress straightened her posture, her mind clear and focused. He looked at her carefully, as if weighing whether to trust her attention to detail or dismiss her effort entirely. She met his gaze without hesitation, offering a polite smile. He paused for a moment, and in that pause, something shifted. There was a flicker of curiosity, almost disbelief, as if he could not believe that someone so young and seemingly ordinary could handle him with such composure. The waitress took a quiet breath and began speaking in the language he was most comfortable with. Her words were simple, respectful, and fluid. She explained the nuances of his order, asking if he wanted any adjustments and ensuring that he felt fully understood. The effect was immediate. The tycoon froze for a moment, a sharp contrast to the impatient man who had almost left earlier. His expression softened, his body relaxing just slightly. The entourage looked at each other, surprised at the change. The patrons leaned forward subtly, curious to witness the unfolding interaction. She continued, carefully describing the dish and the drink, pointing out details that might appeal to his taste without sounding overbearing. Every sentence was measured, polite, and delivered with genuine attention. The young waitress realized that this was more than just taking an order. It was about building trust. She watched closely, noting how he reacted to each suggestion, each explanation. His eyes, which had been stern and demanding, began to show traces of surprise and even appreciation. She maintained her composure, knowing that any sudden movement or nervous gesture could disrupt the fragile calm she had created. The cafe had grown quiet, the hum of normal conversation replaced by the tension and intrigue surrounding the interaction. The young waitress could feel the weight of every gaze in the room, but she did not let it distract her. She stayed focused on the man in front of her, understanding that this moment required both courage and patience. She continued speaking gently, offering small, thoughtful gestures. A nod, a smile, and subtle affirmations that made him feel heard and respected. As the interaction progressed, the tycoon's initial irritation and impatience seemed to melt away. He leaned in slightly, listening more attentively than before. The young waitress continued explaining the subtleties of his order, her knowledge and careful observation turning what could have been a tense encounter into a moment of connection. She noticed the slight shift in his posture, the way his fingers stopped drumming nervously, and the faint ease in his breathing. These small signs confirmed that her approach was working. At one point, she suggested a minor adjustment to his drink that would enhance the flavor based on her experience and knowledge of similar orders. The tycoon paused, then nodded, clearly impressed. The shift in his demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The young waitress saw how a simple gesture, coupled with genuine attention and language he understood, could completely transform the interaction. She maintained a calm, professional tone, ensuring that her confidence never seemed forced or artificial. Other staff members observed quietly, learning from her approach. Some had feared that the situation would escalate, but they now witnessed how patience, attentiveness, and a touch of courage could turn tension into respect. Even the patrons, who had been watching discreetly, began to relax. The atmosphere in the cafe had shifted from one of anxiety and curiosity to quiet admiration. Everyone seemed to understand, in their own way, that this young waitress had done something remarkable without raising her voice or causing a scene. As the conversation drew to a close, the tycoon leaned back slightly, his eyes lingering on the young waitress with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and mild surprise. He had come in expecting to encounter frustration and service that did not meet his standards. Instead, he had found calm, attentiveness, and the ability to communicate in a way that resonated deeply with him. It was an unexpected moment that left a lasting impression, one that neither he nor the young waitress would soon forget. The young waitress stepped back slightly, allowing the tycoon to finalize his order with confidence. She smiled politely, ensuring that she remained approachable and professional. The tycoon nodded in acknowledgement, a subtle but clear sign of approval. The cafe seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as the tension dissipated. What had begun as a potentially explosive encounter had transformed into a quiet, human-centric moment of connection. As the tycoon returned to his table, the young waitress continued her work with a sense of quiet pride and satisfaction. She knew that her calm, careful approach and her willingness to speak in a language he understood had made all the difference. In the end, it was not wealth, status, or authority that had mattered. It was the simple, thoughtful human interaction that had changed the entire dynamic of the cafe that afternoon. It was a reminder that sometimes, understanding, patience, and courage could turn even the most tense situations into something memorable and meaningful. The young waitress watched as the tycoon settled into his seat, his posture still commanding but noticeably more relaxed than when he had first arrived. There was a subtle curiosity in his eyes, a spark that suggested he had been taken by surprise in a way he rarely experienced. She wiped a table nearby, pretending to focus on her task, but her attention remained on him. She understood that the moment was delicate. The tycoon's initial anger had faded, but it could return at any second if he felt ignored or misunderstood. Her goal was to maintain calm and continue building a connection that could turn this ordinary cafe visit into an extraordinary experience. As she prepared the order, she considered what had worked so far. Speaking to him in his native language had caught him off guard, but it had also shown respect and attention to detail. She had seen a flicker of appreciation in his eyes, and she knew that he responded to sincerity and knowledge more than anything else. She moved carefully, her actions deliberate but natural. Every step, every gesture, was meant to reinforce the idea that she was competent, attentive, and respectful. The tycoon glanced around the cafe, his eyes briefly meeting hers again. There was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He was no longer the furious man who had stormed in, but he was still assessing, still cautious. The waitress recognized that the next step would require even more attentiveness. She approached his table with the drink and the dish, holding them with care, making sure everything looked perfect. Her hands were steady, her movements smooth. She placed the items before him and smiled politely, letting him know without words that she had taken the time to ensure his order was just right. As he took his first sip and bite, the tycoon paused, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. He seemed genuinely impressed by the preparation, a subtle nod acknowledging that the effort had not gone unnoticed. The young waitress stepped back slightly, giving him space, but she stayed alert, ready to respond to any need or request. She knew that confidence was as important as skill. By remaining composed, she communicated that she was in control of the situation without being overbearing. The tycoon set down his cup and looked up at her, his eyes sharp yet curious. He spoke briefly in Arabic, a soft question about the dish. The waitress smiled, understanding immediately, and responded in fluent Arabic, explaining the flavors and ingredients. Her words were clear, simple, and respectful. She noticed how his expression changed, the slight relaxation in his eyes and the faint smile that appeared at the corner of his lips. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one. She realized that her ability to communicate in his language had created a bridge of trust and respect. The other patrons began to notice the interaction as well. Whispers floated through the cafe, people intrigued by the unusual scene unfolding before them. A young waitress, calm and composed, had managed to capture the attention of a man who had seemed untouchable at first. It was a subtle, almost invisible drama, but it carried weight. Everyone in the room seemed to sense that something extraordinary was happening, even if they could not fully explain it. The tycoon asked another question about the menu, and the waitress responded patiently, her tone warm and professional. She made small suggestions that might enhance his experience without appearing pushy. She noticed the slight nod of approval when he realized she had anticipated his preferences. The cafe, which had been tense moments earlier, now felt almost serene, the air charged with subtle anticipation. The young waitress understood that this encounter had become more than just serving a meal. It was a delicate dance of observation, communication, and understanding. She kept her gestures natural, maintaining eye contact at just the right moments, offering a reassuring smile when he seemed unsure. Every movement was carefully balanced between attentiveness and respect for his space. She saw that the tycoon, despite his wealth and authority, responded to simple human qualities: patience, sincerity, and the ability to understand him. These small acts of consideration were making a profound impact, more than she had initially imagined. Time seemed to stretch as the interaction continued. The young waitress remained composed, her focus entirely on ensuring that he felt understood and comfortable. She noticed the subtle changes in his posture, the relaxation of his shoulders, and the softening of his gaze. Even the entourage seemed less tense, observing in quiet awe how this ordinary waitress was navigating a complex, high-pressure situation with ease and grace. She continued to engage him, asking gentle, thoughtful questions about his preferences and responding to his comments with clarity and warmth. Her words were simple yet effective, demonstrating both knowledge and attentiveness. The tycoon leaned in slightly, showing genuine interest in her explanations. There was a spark of mutual respect developing, a silent acknowledgement that she had handled the encounter with intelligence and skill. It was a reminder that sometimes, even the most powerful individuals respond not to authority or status, but to care, respect, and understanding. The young waitress noticed a subtle change in his demeanor as he finished his meal. The rigid, impatient man who had walked in moments ago was now calm, composed, and even mildly impressed. He set down his cup and looked at her with an expression that mixed curiosity and appreciation. It was clear that he recognized the effort she had made and the skill with which she had handled the situation. The cafe seemed to exhale collectively, the tension dissipating as the encounter reached a natural, positive turning point. She smiled politely, giving him a subtle nod of acknowledgement while maintaining her professional composure. The tycoon, for the first time that afternoon, allowed himself a small smile in return. The exchange, though brief and simple, carried a weight of mutual understanding. The young waitress realized that her calm, attentive approach had not only prevented a confrontation but had also created a meaningful connection. It was a quiet victory, one that spoke volumes about the power of patience, empathy, and human connection. As he prepared to leave, the tycoon glanced at her one last time, a subtle gesture of respect and acknowledgement that left her quietly proud. She had transformed what could have been a tense, unpleasant encounter into a moment of calm and mutual respect. The cafe returned to its normal rhythm, but the atmosphere had changed slightly. Patrons and staff alike had witnessed something remarkable. An ordinary young waitress managing to impress and calm a man of immense power and presence through simple, genuine human interaction. The young waitress returned to her station, her mind reflecting on what had just occurred. She understood that this experience was more than just a successful service. It was a lesson in observation, patience, and the subtle art of human connection. She had seen firsthand how small gestures, sincere attention, and the ability to understand another person could create a profound impact. The memory of the tycoon's softened expression and the faint smile he had given lingered in her mind, a quiet reminder of what could be achieved when one approached every encounter with thoughtfulness and care. She continued her work with renewed focus and a quiet sense of satisfaction. Even though the afternoon was far from over, she knew that this particular interaction would remain etched in her memory for a long time. It was a human moment, simple yet powerful, that showed how even the most intimidating situations could be transformed with understanding, calm, and courage. And as the tycoon left the cafe, his presence leaving a subtle ripple in the air, the young waitress remained confident that she had navigated a challenge that few others could have handled so gracefully. The afternoon continued with a quiet rhythm, yet the presence of the tycoon had left a lasting impression on the cafe. The young waitress returned to her duties, her mind attentive and aware, knowing that the encounter was far from ordinary. She watched him discreetly, noticing the subtle changes in his behavior. There was a calmness now, a softening of the rigid authority that had defined his demeanor upon entering. It was as if her careful observation and patient interaction had begun to influence more than just his mood. It was shaping how he approached the environment around him. The tycoon adjusted his seat slightly, observing the details of the cafe with a new sense of appreciation. He seemed more attuned to the staff, their efforts, and the atmosphere, rather than focusing solely on his own preferences. The young waitress noticed this and felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She understood that her calm approach and attentive service had not only diffused tension, but had subtly encouraged him to engage with the moment rather than dominate it. She approached his table once more, offering a refill of his drink and a small plate of something fresh from the kitchen. Her steps were careful but confident, each movement designed to communicate care and professionalism without overstepping boundaries. The tycoon looked up as she approached, a faint curiosity in his eyes. He spoke softly, asking a few questions about the dish and its preparation. The young waitress responded smoothly in his language, her explanations clear, concise, and respectful. She noticed the slight relaxation in his posture, the softening of his facial expression, and the subtle tilt of his head as he listened attentively. Other patrons began to take note of the interaction again. There was a hushed intrigue in the cafe, a shared curiosity about how this young waitress had managed to capture the attention of a man so powerful and, initially, so irritable. The staff exchanged quiet glances, recognizing her skill without needing words. She moved among them calmly, balancing efficiency with attentiveness, aware of the impression she was leaving on both the tycoon and those watching. Her actions were not boastful. They were simply thoughtful, human gestures executed with care. The tycoon took a small sip from his cup and then set it down, looking directly at the waitress. His eyes reflected a mixture of respect and curiosity. He asked about other items on the menu, seeking her opinion in a way that was unusual for someone of his status. The young waitress smiled subtly, recognizing the trust implicit in his question. She shared her recommendations, explaining the flavors and ingredients in simple, accessible terms. Her voice remained calm and warm, inviting him to engage without pressure. Each response she gave was measured, demonstrating knowledge while maintaining humility. As their conversation continued, the atmosphere around the table changed. The tycoon's entourage relaxed as well, sensing that the situation was no longer tense. The patrons who had been quietly observing leaned in slightly, captivated by the unexpected dynamic. The young waitress continued to navigate the interaction with precision and empathy, understanding that her calm and composed approach was influencing everyone present. She maintained eye contact, acknowledged subtle cues, and responded with attentiveness that spoke louder than any words could. At one point, the tycoon leaned back, taking a moment to absorb the experience. He had entered the cafe frustrated, ready to leave, but now he was engaged and intrigued. The young waitress noticed a spark of genuine interest in his eyes, a signal that he valued her presence and her input. She kept her movements gentle, offering small gestures of attentiveness. A polite nod, a light smile, and a readiness to assist without being intrusive. The subtlety of her actions made the interaction feel natural and effortless, despite the underlying tension that had existed just moments before. The tycoon began asking questions that revealed a curiosity beyond his initial focus on food and service. He inquired about the cafe, its history, and even the staff. The young waitress answered thoughtfully, demonstrating a depth of knowledge and engagement that went beyond mere service. She explained the traditions behind certain dishes, the care that went into preparation, and the efforts of the team to maintain quality. Each explanation was delivered in his language, smoothly and clearly, reinforcing both respect and understanding. It became evident that the tycoon was no longer just a demanding customer. He was genuinely interested in the interaction itself. The young waitress recognized this shift and continued to engage him, offering insights and suggestions without overwhelming him. She maintained a balance of confidence and humility, ensuring that he felt both respected and attended to. Her awareness of his reactions, her careful observation of his subtle cues, and her ability to respond in kind created a connection that was remarkable in its simplicity and effectiveness. The cafe, once a place of ordinary service, had transformed into a stage for an extraordinary human interaction. Patrons watched quietly, sensing the power of calm, attentiveness, and respect in the exchange. The young waitress had turned what could have been a stressful and confrontational situation into a moment of connection and understanding. The tycoon, who had entered the cafe with frustration and impatience, was now engaged, calm, and even intrigued. The subtle transformation was clear to everyone present, a testament to the impact of thoughtful, human-centered service. As the interaction drew toward a natural conclusion, the young waitress prepared to step back, giving the tycoon space to enjoy his meal and drink. She noticed the small signs of satisfaction in his expressions, the relaxed posture, the thoughtful glances, and the faint but genuine smile. It was a quiet acknowledgement that her efforts had been recognized and appreciated. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted, a subtle wave of relief and admiration spreading among the staff and patrons. She continued to observe discreetly as he finished, making minor adjustments when needed and offering polite assistance. The tycoon's demeanor remained calm and composed, a far cry from the frustration and anger that had marked his arrival. He appeared to be reflecting on the encounter, perhaps reconsidering his expectations or appreciating the skill and composure of the young waitress. The experience had become more than a simple cafe visit. It was an exchange of respect, understanding, and quiet influence. As he prepared to leave, the tycoon nodded toward the waitress, a subtle gesture that conveyed both acknowledgement and respect. It was a small, almost imperceptible act, but its significance was not lost on her. She returned the gesture with a polite nod, understanding that the moment was complete. She had successfully navigated a challenging situation, maintaining calm and professionalism while leaving a lasting impression on someone who rarely paused to notice the efforts of others. The cafe resumed its usual rhythm, though the memory of the interaction lingered in the air. Patrons whispered quietly, reflecting on the remarkable skill and composure demonstrated by the young waitress. Staff members exchanged approving glances, inspired by her example. The young waitress returned to her station, her mind quiet but reflective, knowing that this encounter had tested her abilities in observation, patience, and human connection. She had turned tension into respect, impatience into engagement, and a potential conflict into a moment of meaningful interaction. As the tycoon and his entourage finally left, the young waitress felt a quiet sense of pride and satisfaction. She had navigated an extraordinary challenge with calm, skill, and attentiveness. The experience reinforced her understanding that the simplest gestures, when delivered with sincerity and awareness, could create profound impact. It was a lesson she would carry forward, a reminder that even in ordinary moments, human connection, patience, and courage could transform lives and leave a lasting impression. The cafe had returned to its usual rhythm, but the presence of the tycoon lingered in the minds of both staff and patrons. The young waitress returned to her duties, yet her thoughts remained with the encounter she had just navigated. It had been extraordinary in its simplicity. An interaction that began with tension and frustration had turned into something remarkable, and she understood the subtle power of what had happened. She moved among the tables, serving others with the same attentiveness she had shown before, but now with an added quiet confidence, aware of the impact her actions could have. The tycoon prepared to leave, rising from his seat with measured steps. The young waitress observed him carefully, noticing the subtle gestures that indicated his mood had shifted completely. He had entered the cafe furious and impatient, yet now there was a calm, almost reflective quality to his demeanor. As he passed her, he paused briefly, making eye contact and offering a nod of acknowledgement. The gesture was simple, almost fleeting, but its meaning was profound. It was a recognition of her effort, her patience, and the care she had taken to understand him and his needs. He spoke a few words in his language, a polite expression of thanks. The young waitress smiled warmly, responding naturally and respectfully in kind. There was no need for grandeur or dramatic gestures. The sincerity of the exchange spoke volumes. She felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that she had handled a challenge that many would have found intimidating. Her attention to detail, her calm composure, and her ability to communicate had transformed a tense situation into a meaningful human connection. As the tycoon and his entourage left the cafe, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Patrons and staff alike had witnessed something rare. An ordinary individual navigating an extraordinary encounter with grace, confidence, and skill. Whispers of admiration floated through the room. The staff exchanged quiet smiles, inspired by her example. Customers returned to their conversations, but their eyes occasionally lingered on the young waitress, recognizing that they had seen something unique and impressive. The young waitress continued her work, her movements steady and her mind calm. She reflected on the afternoon, understanding that this experience had taught her valuable lessons. She had seen firsthand how patience, observation, and empathy could transform even the most challenging situations. She had learned that wealth and authority do not always command respect. Often, it is humility, attentiveness, and genuine human connection that leave the deepest impression. Later, when the cafe was quieter, the young waitress took a moment to collect herself. She thought about how small gestures, a polite greeting, careful listening, a calm demeanor, could influence someone profoundly. The tycoon, a man accustomed to commanding others and making decisions with swift authority, had paused, listened, and engaged with her because she had shown understanding, confidence, and respect. She realized that the human element, simple yet powerful, had created a bridge between two very different worlds. The experience had also affected the staff in subtle ways. They approached their work with renewed focus, understanding the power of attentiveness and patience. They recognized that every customer interaction, no matter how ordinary it seemed, could hold potential for meaningful engagement. The young waitress, through her example, had demonstrated that professionalism is not just about efficiency but about understanding and connection. Her calm presence had not only influenced the tycoon but had subtly inspired everyone in the cafe to reflect on their own approach to work and communication. In the days that followed, the story of the encounter began to spread quietly among the regular patrons and staff. People spoke of the young waitress who had impressed the formidable tycoon with her skill, composure, and kindness. The details of how she had communicated in his language, observed his needs, and responded with genuine care became points of admiration. It was a story not just of a single moment but of the power of human connection, patience, and courage. For the young waitress, the experience became a source of personal growth and confidence. She approached every customer with renewed attentiveness, aware that her actions could have profound effects, sometimes in ways she could not immediately see. She had learned that even in ordinary settings, extraordinary moments could unfold when one combined observation, patience, and empathy. It was a lesson that would stay with her for years to come, a reminder of the value of calm, thoughtful interaction. Meanwhile, the tycoon carried the memory of the encounter with him. He reflected on the unusual experience in the cafe, recognizing that it had been more than just a service interaction. It had been a moment of genuine human connection, a reminder that even those accustomed to power could be influenced by attentiveness, respect, and care. The memory of the young waitress's calm demeanor, her understanding, and her subtle gestures remained with him, leaving an impression that transcended ordinary encounters. The cafe itself seemed to retain a hint of the extraordinary energy from that afternoon. Patrons who returned continued their routines, but many shared the story quietly with friends and acquaintances. The young waitress became recognized not just for her efficiency, but for her human-centered approach to service. Her actions had illustrated that true influence does not come from authority or intimidation, but from empathy, attentiveness, and courage in the face of challenge. As the day came to an end, the young waitress reflected on what had happened. She understood that this encounter had changed her perspective, reinforcing the importance of seeing beyond surface behaviors and recognizing the human being behind every expression, every gesture. She felt a quiet pride, not from recognition or reward, but from knowing that she had handled a delicate situation with grace, professionalism, and authenticity. The tycoon's calm nod and sincere words of thanks had been enough to affirm that her approach had succeeded. She cleaned the tables one last time, moving slowly and thoughtfully. Her colleagues noticed her calm satisfaction and subtle confidence, understanding that she had experienced something significant. The cafe, usually a place of routine and ordinary interactions, had become a site of human connection and growth, and the young waitress had been at the center of it, demonstrating the profound impact that patience, empathy, and courage can have. The story of the afternoon became part of the cafe's quiet lore, shared among staff and patrons as an example of how human connection can transform even tense, challenging situations. The young waitress's calm composure, attentive service, and ability to engage thoughtfully in a moment of high tension had left a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it. And for her, it remained a reminder that even the smallest gestures, when executed with care and sincerity, can create extraordinary outcomes. As she closed her station for the day, she thought about the lessons she had learned and the growth she had experienced. The tycoon's visit had been a rare challenge, one that tested her patience, observation, and communication skills. Yet she had emerged not just successful, but transformed by the understanding that human connection, attentiveness, and empathy are more powerful than any authority or frustration. It was a final affirmation of the truth she had always believed, that respect, patience, and genuine care can bridge even the widest gaps, creating moments that leave a lasting impact on everyone involved.